Pledge of Allegiance. So, gentlemen, you want to come forward at this time? Of course, we've got the American flag to my right. And we're going to follow your lead, okay? So if everyone would please rise. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you very much. We appreciate it. Okay, members present this evening are myself, Mayor Morrow, Council members Gearboss, CO, McClellan, Mitchell, Mayor Pro Tem Tahar, and Councilwoman Dillon. From City staff, we have City Manager Campbell, Deputy Clerk Bloom. I don't believe City Treasurer Bennett is with us this evening. Police Chief Hart, Wastewater Treatment Superintendent Skull, City Superintendent Engineer Rubel, DPW Director Fordyce, and Attorney Smith. The rest of you who are in the audience this evening, we welcome you, and we would encourage you to sign in the back to my left. At this time, the Chair would entertain a motion to approve the agenda as submitted unless there are amendments.
So moved?
As submitted, Ms. Dillon?
Yes.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Councilwoman McClellan. Hearing no discussion, all those in favor of approving the agenda as submitted signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Ayes have it, and the motion carries unanimously. There are no absences this evening, so we'll proceed to our one presentation of the night, which is our annual Planning Commission yearly presentation. And I believe this will be done by Chairman Beardsley with the assistance of our staff liaison, Gary Rubel. Mr. Beardsley, we welcome you here today. Thank you for your leadership, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. Rubel has the technology part of it. I'm just going to get back to her. Oh, we have a problem. For the benefit of everybody here, we represent the Planning Commission. I'm the chairman for 2017 and again for 2018. The Planning Commission is a representation of citizens of the city of Saline to provide input and advice and counsel and recommendations to council on the topic of land use. Land use primarily where you put things like if you want a factory built next to your house, so we take up those kinds of things through areas called zoning. So we're going to review some of the things that we did during the year. Let me simply summarize and say it was a very busy and productive and fabulous year for the city of Saline relative to planning. What we will show you here tonight is a high-level view of some of the projects that we actually did take into consideration. Because we do represent sort of the residents, obviously all of you do as well, but we're sort of an independent body to give you counsel. This year we actually had quite a few transactions where the city of Saline was the owner of the property or the seller of the property. And I thought that gave us a really great opportunity to exercise our due diligence and our judgment to make sure that the process was complete and what it needed to be. Many of you have been involved in those transactions, so you know full well how important that process was on some of those projects as well.
Are you able to get it working, Mr. Rubel?
Yeah, Chase is working on it. It worked last week.
Well, let me continue.
Please.
In the absence of projects. Let me tell you from my perspective what was really impressive about this year. And the first would be the efforts of staff, and that includes Mr. Rubel and also Assistant Clerk Gray in preparing us as a council. But also, every time we received a site plan, generally speaking, either at preliminary or at final, there was a lot of input that had been provided by staff. And I can tell you, I was always very impressed by the thoroughness with which staff actually considered many of these site plans. Questions that they spent a lot of time in order to create that I would have not, as a commissioner, really had the detail orientation to notice. So staff has done a phenomenal job in helping, I think, vet and make more complete our consideration and our work on the commission.
Focus on password edit.
What is that voice?
It's my computer I'm trying to get her up. Been running, her computer's not working.
Do all of you have the packages? Have you
We do
seen
not
the
have a hard
PowerPoint?
copy of the PowerPoint presentation.
So we will send that to you.
Mr. Rubel, Mr. Stanton, do you believe you can get the PowerPoint working in a few moments? Could we proceed with other items on the agenda? Would that be appropriate? Mr. Stanton? Reboot it? All right. Let's proceed then, unless there are objections from the dais. Let's proceed with the rest of the agenda. Mr. Beardsley, we appreciate your patience. Sorry for our technical difficulties. Mr. Rubel, Mr. Stanton, flag me down or make me aware that things are working, then we'll proceed directly to the presentation. So now we come to citizen comments on agenda items. Under the Open Meetings Act, any citizen may come forward at this time, make comment or question on an item that appears on this agenda. Comments will be limited to 3 minutes per person. Anyone who would like to speak is requested but not required to state his or her name and address for the record.
Mary Hess, and I would like to address the minutes of the contract for the cleaning development. It was decided, apparently by the manager, not to put out bids for the cleaning of, I forget who it is, but anyway, she was very glad she got the opportunity to bid on the janitorial service. City manager, I know, can use his discretion, I think up to $10,000. Then a contract is to be bid out. The present company had a 6-month edge, but that should not come into play until the bids are in. Of course, you can do what you want to with your money, but when you are stewards of our money, city contracts should be put out to bid. It removes the selective process. Thank you.
Excuse me, is it working? My apologies, folks. Just hang tight.
Yeah, we'll have to wait till the screen comes down.
Where's Brian's one? You got that screen on YouTube?
If it doesn't pop up in a moment, I don't think it's going to. I was thinking we'd spend money to fix it.
It's not on monitor.
For the workman.
Good.
Sorry about that. Someone unplugged the cable.
Folks, you'll still have an opportunity to comment during the public comment period if you wish, but we will proceed now to the annual presentation of the Planning Commission. Mr.
We will
Beardsley,
make
Mr.
this-
Rubel, I apologize for that.
We'll make this quick, but feel free to ask us to elaborate or take as much time as you would like. Obviously, you have a full agenda tonight and a large crowd, so we want to make sure you have time to do what you're doing. All right, so we're just going to maybe recap some of the projects that you, as council, already know, but maybe some of the residents do not. Do you want me moving forward here? Here we go.
This year's Planning Commission, you probably already know who most of us are. We certainly represent the broader community. We also are well-served by some assigned staff, including Mr. Rubel and Ms. Gray, as well as Carlisle Wortman, who have done a really great job. Primarily Planner Atkin has been with us all year long. A finer-looking group has never been seen. We do operate on a level of expense budget. It is predominantly driven by the number of transactions that come before us and the amount of site planning work that we need to do with Carlisle Wortman, but we are certainly within budget. And if we're not, it's probably a good thing because it means that there's a lot more development going on in the city. One of the things we did was have a joint session related to Salt Springs Park. Sort of kicked off the year with that effort. Look forward to that continuing. We approved a 16-unit apartment development there on Saline, Ann Arbor Saline Road and Waterworks. That is coming along nicely. New property being developed there next to the BP gas station and optical facility. It has not yet broken ground. We are hoping that it will. Many of you probably remember this project, Maple Oaks, a very innovative housing design. It's going to be a really great community resource, and that's pretty much the way it looks today, with a little more snow. And we just, at the last meeting, approved the final site plan for right next door, the Maple Cove condominiums, which will be 36 new housing units in the city. And most of you also remember this. This was formerly city land, the new Zippy Auto Wash going on Michigan Avenue. And approval of the Best Western portion of this project, with the hardware portion to follow later on the adjacent site. Gary, would you like to speak to any of the administrative amendments?
Two of the site plan amendments went to, they were smaller ones, went to the Planning Commission. Electronics is building a small storage building. And then Section 802 of the zoning code allows staff to make small site plan amendments. So staff did the reviews and authorized those 5 items on the bottom. And you probably recognize Saline Social Services, new parking lot rehab. Wendy's needed to install an outdoor freezer, and that was accomplished. Windsor Mold needed to install 2 storage silos, the foundations of which were on the prior approved site plan, just at it took a long time for the silos to appear. Wacky Sushi and X Golf both were reviewed for an outdoor patio use to supplement their business clientele's needs.
It's nice to see the diversity that's coming into the city of Saline from an economic and business standpoint. You will see here special land use reviews. 1, 2, 3, 4 recreational and/or fitness businesses that received special land use permissions, as well as the Best Western Hotel. A few zoning amendments, so not very significant amount of zoning work. The UAW into an office category, and then we changed the community unit plan ordinance to a plant unit development ordinance, and that is going to allow a lot more flexibility. We've already had 1 or 2 projects utilize the one use the PUD ordinance. And to make that hotel work, we had to look at a height exemption, so that was an interesting exercise that we had to go through, both at the Planning Commission, but also obviously you all at the Commission as well. We set some goals. Gary was really helpful, I think, in coming up with those, and when we reviewed them, we really wanted to talk more about how we would possibly measure some of these things that we hope to accomplish in 2018. It has been a long time since we looked at the bylaws, so we want to be able to do that. We also want to remind ourselves of the importance of green planning, green aspects of developments, as well as many of the non-motorized aspects of planning. So we are going to sort of challenge ourselves to keep track of how often we are recording that as we're going through the site planning process, more of an internal discipline. And as you might expect with a lot of development in the area, our relationships with other municipalities and neighbors is very important. So we need to challenge ourselves from a planning standpoint to reach out and make sure we have communications to our neighbors. I think with that, our presentation is done. Mr. Rubel, did you have more things to add?
Well, as you can see, it was a pretty challenging year for the Planning Commission members. They faced all of the challenges very well and addressing all the unique circumstances involved with each one of those. And then we look forward this year, of course, to some even more complex items as we address the Lair property annexation, zoning, and site plan process.
Any questions that we can answer?
Gentlemen, thank you. That was an excellent presentation indeed. It was a very, very active year on Planning Commission with good discussions and dialogues on some pretty complex and thorny issues. So we appreciate your time. Are there questions for either Mr. Rubel or Chairman Beardsley? Gentlemen, thank you very much. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Okay, we come back to citizen comments on agenda items. Under the Open Meetings Act, again, any citizen may come forward at this time, make comment or question on an item that appears on this agenda. Comments will be limited to 3 minutes per person. Anyone who would like to speak is requested but not required to state his or her name and address for the record. Any additional citizen comments? Please.
Mark Hensel at 492 Rosemont here in Saline. I'm just standing up again to speak in support of the non-discrimination ordinance. I realize now it's been essentially a year, fairly close to a year, since the mayor first brought it up in a town hall in a coffee hour. And March will see a year since it was introduced as an idea to the council. And I want to thank all the councilors, City Attorney Smith, particular members, Linda Terhar, Dean Gerbach, and Christy Mitchell for their hard work on this. It's turned out to be a big chunk of legislation that I don't think most city councils take on that often. I do want to say that I still remain concerned, as I have since October, with that initial draft with item 12 under definitions in terms of assignment of gender and its implications for the exemptions later on in the ordinance. I hope that as this is an acknowledgement and introduction of the ordinance, that work can still be done on that language, because I think we have a ways to go there. But again, thank you all so much for all your hard work, and I look forward to seeing this at a vote hopefully next month successfully.
Good, thank you for your comment. Additional comments? Please.
Hi, my name is Mike Lamone. I live in York Township, although I'm a former resident of Saline and a frequent visitor. I rise in support of the non-discrimination ordinance, and I'd like to say that I'm a professor at the University of Michigan, and specifically in the College of Engineering, and that's not a place known for diversity. But right now we're undergoing quite a few searches for new department chairs. And I'm on a committee that is interviewing all of the finalists for all these different departments to interview them about their thoughts on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I get to hear a wide range of opinions about this. And believe it or not, there are quite a few leaders out there that are rather clueless that a diverse workforce will lead to a better solution, and are also clueless about whether there is about the need for building an equitable workplace and an inclusive culture that will lead to a diverse workforce that will lead to that better solution. So my experiences on that committee have led me to say, I would encourage you to show leadership on this, and this non-discrimination ordinance will show that Saline welcomes all people and is taking a strong stand towards creating a welcoming place for a diverse population, and is striving to make Saline an equitable and inclusive community. Thanks.
Very good, thank you. Additional citizen comments?
Hi, my name is Juliette Rogers, and I've been a member of the Saline community for 12 years and have 3 children who are now in Saline schools. Our family consists of 2 parents, 3 kids, 2 dogs, and a cat. We're pretty much like everyone else around here and really feel like we're a part of the Saline community most of the time. When we moved from Ann Arbor, our friends were totally perplexed. They said, "You won't be welcome there. You'll be the only gay family there, and your kids will be made fun of and will be miserable." And we thought really hard about that. And we talked to a lot of people who lived in Saline who promised us that that would not be the case. And then a few years later, when my oldest kids, my twins, were in 3rd grade, the Saline School Board voted down a non-discrimination statement that would have included protection of LGBT students and staff. And these same friends looked at us and said, "Well, what did you expect? What did you expect when you moved there?" In order to protect my kids and ensure that they received an education rooted in the foundation of tolerance, diversity, and inclusion that we believe in, we pulled them from Saline schools and took them to Emerson. A lot of straight families in our neighborhood did the same thing. And to me, that was really sad. Like, I moved to Saline in part for the schools. And when they chose to take that route, I felt like we had to stand tall and really be true to ourselves. So we moved them to Emerson, took that huge financial hit, and that worked out. But I want that in this community, and I want kids in this community to be able to learn the same things about the world and about each other that kids who pay to go to Emerson learn. Many of us have worked hard to convince the outside world that Saline has changed. All 3 of my kids, like I said, are back in Saline schools, and we're out as a gay 2-mom family. And I'm sure that that's hard for them, but they choose that. They choose to be out. And they knew I was coming here tonight, and I said, "Well, you know, that could be made public." And they said, "Well, how else would we want to live? This is our community." So I ask you to stand tall, as Mark said, and really bring diversity, equity, inclusion into the spotlight and proactively say that Saline is a welcoming community. I don't think that we can, now that you kind of took it up, to not do it essentially says we're not. And so, that horse is out of the barn in some ways. And I really hope that you choose to pass this NDO, because for those of you in the majority, and any of you sitting here who are part of that, it may seem insignificant. But for those of us who are minorities in Saline, especially invisible minorities, something like this actually matters. And so it might be just a small thing on your agenda, but it matters a lot to people like me and my family. Thanks.
Thank you. Additional comments?
Good evening, Mayor Morrow, members of council. My name is Nathan Triplett. I'm the Director of Public Policy for Equality Michigan, a statewide LGBT civil rights organization. And I'm here this evening to convey our organization's support in concept for your non-discrimination ordinance and to thank you for your interest in becoming the 44th Michigan community to ban discrimination based on both sexual orientation and gender identity in employment, housing, and public accommodation. Your residents have already spoken far more eloquently than I could to the importance of this ordinance to the community here in Saline, but I also want to offer my thanks. But also to reiterate that I'm hopeful between this meeting this evening and your final vote on this ordinance that we can address just 2 outstanding issues that our organization has identified and share with you. First is the breadth of the religious exemptions contained in section 46-8A and B. And secondly is what I believe to be the unintended consequence of the interrelationship between exemption I in 46-8, that being the exemption related to sex-segregated facilities, and the definition that you've created in your ordinance for the term sex assigned at birth in 46-2. It's our belief that, again, the unintended consequence of the interrelationship between these 2 sections is, rather than to prohibit discrimination based on gender identity in public accommodations, specifically sex-segregated facilities, that it would license that discrimination, which I know is not your intention. So we appreciate the partnership that some of you on council have already shown our organization in working through these technical issues, and look forward to completing that work and seeing you become the 44th community to take this important step. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Nathan. Additional comments? Please.
Hi, my name is Mitch Rode. I'm over here at the school at Quantum Signal, representing myself as well as my organization. I made these comments probably about 6 months to a year ago when we were talking about it the first time, but figured it'd be worth restating that as a technology business in the community, it's very important to me that individuals of different backgrounds are feeling welcome to come here and to work here and play here and live here. With all due deference to the professor who just spoke, I went to the University of Michigan as well, and I can tell you there's a lot more diversity in the graduate school at the engineering school than I see in a lot of places. And so when I go out to recruit the top and the best and the brightest, I can tell you that when I do the interviews, it's folks from Asia and Europe and Africa and South America and all over the place. And in fact, when I was a graduate student there, I was by far the minority as far as being a Caucasian from Michigan. So it is important to me to recruit the best to my organization, and if folks feel comfortable, then I think that we're able to recruit those folks, and if folks feel uncomfortable, then we won't, and we'll either fail or have to move. And so from a business perspective, in addition to obviously my personal feelings about it, it's very important that we make folks feel included and welcome in this community, and thus I support passing of an ordinance. Thank you.
Thank you, Mitch. Additional citizen comments, please.
Yes, hello, my name is Josh Braley. I am not a City of Saline resident. I'm actually a Saline Township resident. I came up here just to say that I am the Cub Master of Pack 464 out of Pleasant Ridge Elementary. We are chartered through St. Andrew's Catholic Church, and I wanted to come up here and thank the mayor for taking time out of his extremely busy schedule to talk to our fifth grade Webelos tonight, and thank you to the council for having us up here and allowing us to sit in. That's what I had planned to say, and now that I've said it, I have one additional comment, and that is to say that as an Eagle Scout, if any of our residents ever need someone to stand with them and support them, you can call on me. Thank you.
Well, again, we're delighted to have our young men with us and appreciate your leadership in helping us with the Pledge of Allegiance tonight. We thank you for those comments. Are there additional citizen comments on agenda items?
Hello, my name is Susan Eastep. I am Lodi Township, and my children are part of the Saline School District, and I'm part of a queer family. I am in a queer family. And so I just want to thank you for taking this on, being part of the Saline community. I think it means a lot to community members who are minority and to families as well. And I would like to encourage to, as others have said, like the most inclusive language. And another thing, I just seen it in the news just a couple of days ago. Governor Snyder appointed Ira Combs, an anti-LGBT advocate, to the Michigan Civil Rights Commission. And so he has fought against in Jackson, the non-discrimination ordinance there, and also the GSA, so the Gay Straight Alliance. So I encourage you all to take on this vote as soon as possible. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further citizen comments? Well, thank you all. We will proceed now to the consent agenda. The following consent agenda will normally be adopted without discussion. However, at the request of any citizen or council member, any item may be removed from the consent agenda for council discussion. Is there a motion?
Move to approve as submitted.
Moved by Dillon to approve as submitted. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Mayor Pro Tem Tahar. Hearing no discussion, all those in favor of approving the consent agenda as submitted signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Ayes have it, the motion carries unanimously. We move on to new business item 18-22. This is proposed ordinance number 796, an ordinance to amend section 6.12 of the Saline zoning ordinance to provide special use criteria for massage establishments in accordance with state law. This will be a motion to acknowledge receipt of the January 25th, 2018 memo from the Saline Planning Commission and to approve or not to approve ordinance number 796, an ordinance to amend section 6.12 of the Saline zoning ordinance to provide special use criteria for massage establishments in accordance to state law.
Move to acknowledge.
It's moved by Dillon to acknowledge. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Councilwoman McClellan. Attorney Smith, since most of the action items this evening you will be taking the lead on, if you want to maybe give a 60-second synopsis about what's being proposed,
Sure.
how it came about, and then I would also rely on Mayor Pro Tem Tahar. There are some of these changes are recommended by or have been recommended, by the Code and Ordinance Review Task Force, which, as my council colleagues will recall, she serves as the liaison to. So, Linda, if you have any thoughts or opinions, please feel free to chime in.
So
Mr. Smith.
let me deal with this and the next agenda item together. State law currently licenses, under state law, massage therapists are licensed. They have preempted the field, so we can't locally license the individuals who carry on massage therapy. We can license the establishments, but not the individuals. In addition, when we were looking at a massage establishment in town, there was a requirement in our ordinance that dates back many, many years to require a sink in each room where massages were occurring. And that's kind of an outdated regulation now with hand sanitizers and portable lavatories and other things that you can have to address those issues. So we're recommending that that also be changed to recognize modern technology. So those are the two fundamental changes to remove the regulations that we had in our ordinance of the individuals carrying on massage therapy and to change the laboratory requirement.
Very good. Are there any questions for Mr. Smith regarding his memo of January the 25th? Ms. Dillon.
Does the health industry recognize hand washing and traditional soap and water and hand sanitizer as equal?
Well, if you see what, in my doctor's office is, yes, they come in and use hand sanitizer before and after seeing the patient. And they don't always wash their hands.
Okay.
Mr. Seal.
I see in one of these, and I'm not sure which one, I don't recall at this moment, it actually requires a sink somewhere in the building.
Yes, there's still a requirement for restroom facilities in the building and available to both patrons and staff.
So if a person were to lease an office space, one room in a building that had a public lavatory with hand washing facilities in it, are accessible to both the masseur, masseuse, and their patrons, that would suffice it?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Is that your only question, Mr. Seal?
Thank you.
Okay, I actually had another question.
Okay, go ahead, Ms. Dillon.
Okay. On section 6.12, subsection 1, subsection B, the language where it says establishment and barbers and beauticians performing massage, blah, blah, blah. So is there, I guess it just, is there a threshold as to what's being performed so that they are considered part of that? I mean, I'm just saying, if you set up one table that says, oh, we do nails here, does that exclude them from this?
No, barbers and beauticians are separately licensed and perform scalp massages and other kinds of things. And they're licensed under state law to do that, so that's why the exception is there.
Okay, thank you.
Additional questions for Mr. Smith? Then we'll proceed to vote on the motion. It's been properly moved by Dillon, seconded by McClellan to acknowledge receipt. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Ayes have it, the motion carries unanimously. Is there a motion now to approve or not to approve? Ordinance number 796.
Move to approve.
Second.
Moved by CO, seconded by Mayor Pro Tem Tahar. Is there any discussion? No discussion, then we'll proceed to vote. All those in favor of approving signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Ayes have it, the motion carries unanimously. We move on to new business item 18-23. This was proposed ordinance number 797, an ordinance to add a new article to Chapter 22 of the Saline Code of Ordinances to regulate massage establishments.
Move to approve, or to acknowledge and approve.
Well, you beat me to reading the motion, but I'll entertain it. You're fine, Mr. CO.
Thank you.
So it was a motion to acknowledge and to approve?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Gearbaugh. Mr. Smith, you alluded to this ordinance 797. Do you care to make any additional comments?
No.
Okay. Are there any questions for Mr. Smith? Any discussion? Then we'll proceed to vote. It's been properly moved by CO, seconded by Gearbaugh, to acknowledge receipt and to approve. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Ayes have it, the motion carries unanimously. We move on to new business item 18-24. This is proposed ordinance number 799, an ordinance to amend Chapter 14, Section 4-6 of the City of Saline Code of Ordinances regarding reasonable control of animals. This will be a motion to acknowledge receipt of the February 1st, 2018 memo from City Attorney Smith's office, and to approve or not to approve ordinance number 799, an ordinance to amend Chapter 14, Section 14-6 of the City of Saline Code of Ordinances regarding reasonable control of animals.
Move to acknowledge and approve.
Thank you, Councilmember CO. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Mayor Pro Tem Tahar. Mr. Smith, do you want to give a 30-second or 1-minute synopsis on this?
It simply extends the requirement to clean up after your dogs to dogs that aren't on a leash, and it requires that cleanup be immediate, so somebody can't say, I was planning to come back tomorrow and do it.
Seems very reasonable and straightforward. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, Mr. Smith, this recommendation came via Jesse O'Jack, our prosecuting attorney?
It did.
Very good. Ms. Tahar, I know this was discussed at the Code and Ordinance Review Task Force. Anything you'd like to add?
It seems like a no-brainer.
Indeed, it does. Questions for Mr. Smith? Mr. Gearbaugh?
I know this has always been a concern, but how about cats? We always deal with dogs in this issue, but cats are as bad, if not more of a potential problem.
Yeah, cats aren't usually on leash, and if you want to deal with cats, I guess we could make a follow-up recommendation.
I mean, what would be a policy? Do we have any issue with regards to cats if they are wandering in somebody else's yard and not taking
Well,
care of
cats aren't supposed to be out and wandering in somebody else's yard anyway, but if you want to require the cleanup, we could do that.
It's more the control. I mean, in this situation, we're talking about a leash and everything.
It's more of a control, but they already aren't supposed to be out.
Okay. Thank you.
They aren't supposed to be catting around.
Nice one. I'll give you that one.
Good pun. Additional questions for Mr. Smith? Any subsequent debate on the motion? It's been properly moved by CO, seconded by Tahar, to acknowledge receipt and to approve. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Ayes have it, the motion carries unanimously. We move on to new business item 18-25. This is a resolution to abandon rights of future street use for a portion of Sauk Trail Court right-of-way and for outlet of a Sauk Trail Business Park. So this will be a motion to acknowledge receipt of the January 31st, 2018 memo from City Attorney Scott, and to approve or not to approve the resolution to abandon rights of future street use of portions of Sauk Trail Court right-of-way and for outlet A of the Sauk Trail Business Park.
Move to acknowledge.
Moved by Dylan to acknowledge. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Gearbaugh. Mr. Smith, do you want to comment on your memo of January the 31st?
Yeah, this was really part of the agreement to sell the property. We had decided we don't need to build and maintain that segment of road because those that are buying those lots that are owned by the city will provide internally for circulation between and among those lots. So you saw Zippy's go in. Zippy's is interconnecting with the planned parking lot and drive aisles for the hotel and the Ace Hardware store. And we've got property set aside to further connect with the lot further to the west that's still owned by the city and not under contract. So we don't need to build, maintain, plow the road and so forth. And this also provides a little extra property for them to use in development. In the case of the Ace Hardware store and the hotel, that will also allow us to reroute the electrical lines to the south and get it off of the Michigan Street right away.
Very good. Are there questions for Attorney Smith? Ms. Dillon?
Is there a reason why we're not waiting until we have a final agreement of the contract is finalized for that property?
For which property?
For the hotel property at this point?
Well, we do have a final agreement. We've got a closing date of
But it hasn't
February
closed.
28th. And, well, but this is a condition of closing is that this street be vacated.
Okay, now if it were not to close, then what would we do?
Well, we would still own the property and own the street at that point, so we could do
Would we
whatever
have
we
to
want to do.
reverse it? to rededicate it as a road?
Well, we could rededicate it, or we could just build the road. So we'll still own the property. We won't lose any control. All we're doing at this point is saying that we're not going to put the road in.
Thank you.
Mr. Gearbaugh had his hand up first, Mr. Seal, then I'll jump back to you. Mr. Gearbaugh.
Just real quick, how wide is the easement for utilities and everything? I'm glad that that's in this condition zone.
Well, right now, we're retaining an easement over the whole right-of-way for utilities. We will tear that down when the power lines actually go in. It's only the power lines and any communication lines that are on those poles that we're worried about. We don't have any other utilities in there or any need to put any other utilities in there. We verified that with Mr. Rubel over this past couple weeks.
So all of our sewer and everything is connected where we don't need to put any?
Right.
Got it. Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Seal?
Maybe this is a question more for city staff than it is for Mr. Smith, but was there ever talk of connecting further to the west with the shopping center that exists over there where the current Ace Hardware is?
The Oaks?
So if I may, Mayor?
Please.
So yes, there has been discussion on that, and then potentially with Lot 20, as Mr. Smith alluded about the third of the 3 lots, city lots, right, to the west. So potentially the idea would be that we would have a connection with the Oaks coming in through what is now Lot 20, and then there would be connection through the southern half of those lots together to tie that all together.
Okay, so that's not been abandoned, nor will we obviate our capability to do it by passing this resolution.
Right, this road wouldn't make that connection anyway. It cul-de-sacs well east of that. But we have talked about that and want to be able to do that, and in fact have said that when Lot 20 is developed, we are going to make that request then to make that connection.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Additional questions? Then we'll proceed to vote. It's been properly moved by Dillon, seconded by Gearbaugh to acknowledge receipt. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed say nay. Ayes have it, the motion carries unanimously. How about a motion now to approve or not to approve?
Move to approve.
Thank you, Mr. Seo. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Ms. McClellan. Discussion? No discussion, then we'll proceed to vote. All those in favor of approving signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed say nay. Ayes have it, the motion carries unanimously. We move on to new business item 18-26. This is fee book update. This will be a motion to acknowledge receipt of the January 30th, 2018 memo from City Superintendent Engineer Rubel and to approve or not to approve the citywide fee book revisions and changes as submitted. Is there a motion?
Move to acknowledge receipt and to approve.
Thank you, Mr. Gearbaugh. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Mayor Pro Tem Tahar. Mr. Rubel, would you care to come to the podium and comment regarding your memo of January the 30th?
Thank you, Mayor. You probably recall every year at this time, staff gathers possible fee changes, and it enhances the revenues to compensate for expenses that have occurred in the performance of these duties and tasks related to these fees. We try to concentrate on those fees that are like around 5 years old or older, because time and effort increased in value over that period of time. And so there's 18 pages of fees, hundreds and hundreds of different fee schedules for all departments. And so you can see we have earmarked just a relatively small number compared to the total of those fees that merit increases of a small scale, you might say. Some of the first section on this, if you go to the Excel spreadsheets, there's basically 2 parts. One part shows what we recommend for amending certain line item fees. And then on page 2, you'll see where it says rate automatically increases on July 1. Those are the water and sewer connection fees that council approved per a 5-year schedule. So that will automatically occur, but I put that there so you can see what those would be. Beginning July 1, when new houses connect after July 1, that's the water and sewer connection fee that they will pay. And then the last page shows some fee adjustments which says fee items under consideration for 2018. We have at least one pending fee right now, and that's the ordinance that would be heard by Planning Commission on the 28th, come to the City Council for approval. And then at the time that the City Council adopts the food vendor license, by that time, we should have a proposed fee schedule that would go along that. Part of the ordinance states that the rates are established by and approved by City Council.
Thank you, Mr. Rubel. Are there questions for our city superintendent engineer? Ms. Mitchell.
Thank you, Your Honor. Thank you, Mr. Rubel. You mentioned that you were trying to review fees that had not been raised in 5 years. To the best of your knowledge, does this mean that every single fee has now been looked at and increased?
Well, every year we go through and certain fees do meet the qualifications for an increase based on maybe increased effort, or maybe there's a new fee, or maybe there just needs to be an adjustment to that fee to the nature of inflation or anything else that affects it, like maybe we adopted more resolutions and amendments that created more work and demands. We have selected those every year, and so I usually go through all 18 pages, look at every fee. I put together a worksheet. I send it out to the departments. The departments then decide whether or not they want to select those fees and then send it back to me. And then I put the composite together for the City Council.
So I'm sorry, just to clarify, are there any fees that have not been raised in the past, 5 years?
Well, certainly there's probably some, because some basically because they aren't used much, or because they keep up with inflation on a formula basis. Some fees don't really require adjustment, and some departments choose not to raise those fees.
Thank you.
Mr. Campbell, please, if you care to comment.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I believe, just as an example, I believe it was connection fees that were recently raised I think council decided last year, but it had been 10 years since. So I just as a note that for the most part, they, every 5 years thoroughly, but there will be some, as Mr. Rubel mentioned, there will be some that don't get included, but for the most part, they do.
Additional questions for Mr. Rubel. Mr. Gearbaugh.
You mentioned that we're raising the water fees and such for over a 5-year period. Didn't we discuss that further about potentially possibly doing 3 years instead of 5? Maybe I'm mistaken, but...
Well, we actually, if you may recall, we actually review it on an annual basis now, the last few years. It used to be historically, and a lot of communities still use it this way, where they bring in a firm and they do a 5-year rate study, right? And you're kind of locked in for those 5 years. And there's a lot of things that go into it, but one is kind of the capital improvement projects and such, right? Inflation, collective bargaining agreements, the like, all those things going together, right, to determine what it should be. And so we actually, a few years ago, when Tetra Tech did a study we said, hey, we want to give us the tools, right, the model. So we actually, with our CIP, we do that on an annual basis to look and see, where are we at? Do we, can we, for water and for sewer, we want to try and keep it as level as we can, right? So it's not big spikes jumping up, but typically what you see, at least here in Saline, is if, for instance, we have to raise, if the sewer fund is weak, you'll see that go up a little, and a lot of it because of projects that we're doing, right? But then we compensate then by typically the water fund is fairly strong, so that we're not hitting our residents so hard, right? So it's kind of back and forth, if you will.
And I think actually you answered my question. It was more the phasing in of connection fees, not necessarily the actual water fees.
Right.
Just right when you mentioned that was going up. The other question, but in terms of our fees overall, building and the other fees and such, when do those ever are they audited by checking them against other communities or anything else? Do we ever have our auditors review it in terms of consistency and covering costs?
Yeah, I don't know that I mean, I know obviously when Mr. Rubel does his annual review and looking at things, from a building perspective. But I mean, I don't know that we've actually, the auditors have looked at it from a comparison, a competitiveness comparison to our neighbors.
Because my concern has always been that we so subsidize the building department based on the, $1 million or plus that we've done over the last 20 years or whatever it is, that we make sure that our fees are appropriately and costing to the.
Oh, absolutely. Well, and like I said, we do that, right? Because we essentially, with Bolt, right, you've got to establish that, that what you're charging is reasonable in accounting for your true expenses.
For water and sewer, I agree. It's just the other costs too that.
Right,
making sure that
but
complies.
typically that's kind of, Bolt is kind of, that's kind of a rule of thumb, right? I mean, for any of our fees that we charge, we've got to use that to measure against.
Okay, thank you.
Additional questions? Mr. Scott, would you like, or Mr. Scott? Mr. Smith, excuse me, would you care to comment?
A couple of things. One, Todd's exactly right, that fees have to be roughly proportional to the cost of administering the program. So we can't have, you can't use your building code fees, your building inspection fees to augment your general fund and so forth. Water and sewer, we also have additional requirements in that we have bond coverage requirements, and we have bond covenants that require annual reviews to make sure that we're covering operation, maintenance, and repair, and also debt service with appropriate coverage, and that we have an appropriate reserve set up to cover those funds. So that's why you get, on some of those, pretty close scrutiny from year to year, and the auditors do look at the water and sewer funds to make sure you're meeting those bond requirements. If we don't meet those bond requirements, there are ramifications of that. You have to file with the federal government and with the SEC and indicate that you've failed to meet some bond covenants.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Smith. Additional questions? Ms. Dillon?
I just have a question. So just to clarify, all of the fee book is reviewed every year, every line item within the book. So, like for the police department with the breath tests, it was, the fee dates back to 2012. It was a $5 charge. It'll now be a $10 charge. Have we been operating at a loss, or was that fee just increased?
Well, I can't answer that question. The police chief is here, but that's the
But
recommendation
I
we
think
had.
there's others that are similar to that. I guess I just was wondering if,
I think Mr. Campo can address that concern.
okay.
Todd?
Yeah, I mean, as far as it's not operating at a loss per se. It's just to Mr. Gierbach's question about the competitiveness. And I think Chief Hart would echo this, that $5 for coming in for a PBT for folks that are court, typically what this is for when they come in, they're court ordered, right? Maybe they're drunk driving type of thing, that judge orders them to come in on some frequency, whether it's weekly or every couple days a week, whatever it is, and then we can charge for that. So I mean, as far as, it takes all of about a minute and a half for them to come into the dispatch window, pull out their little tube, the dispatcher gives them the PBT, and we record it and go about their way. But this is something that we're low on, comparatively speaking, to other departments, so I'm recommending that it be increased.
Okay. But it's taken us this long to sort of compare that. I guess that's what I'm getting at. Is 5 years too long of a span? I mean,
No, it's just a benchmark, sort of a benchmark.
Yeah,
right. But if we're reviewing it every year, are we reviewing it against something?
Well, yeah, we're looking at what the ratio is, or maybe what it costs to perform the service. Maybe something new happened, required more effort, maybe material costs went up. So we look into see if outside factors or even some internal factors impact the service, that in a way that it doesn't, the revenue doesn't cover the expense.
And I'd also say the reality too is, for instance, in this case with Chief Hart, right, coming from a different department, saying, hey, as he's evaluating things and bringing a new set of eyes, that also, I mean, practically speaking, that's how sometimes these fees are changed.
Thank you.
Additional questions? Any subsequent debate on the motion? Mr. Rubel, thank you. It's been properly moved by Gearboss, seconded by Tahar, to acknowledge receipt and to approve. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Ayes have it, the motion carries unanimously. We move on to new business item 18-27, proposed ordinance number 793, an ordinance amending chapters 46 of the Saline City Code, adding sections 46-1 to Article 1 to protect the civil rights of individuals in employment, public accommodation, housing, and city contracts, and by repealing Article 2 entitled Fair Housing. This will be a motion to acknowledge the receipt of the proposed ordinance number 793, the revised draft non-discrimination ordinance, and to schedule proposed ordinance number 793 for council action at the March 5th City Council meeting.
Move to acknowledge.
Let Gearbaugh be the mover and Mitchell be the second. Who would like to begin? Mr. Smith, Mayor Pro Tem Tahar is the chair of the work group. We'll defer to Mayor Pro Tem Tahar. The floor is yours.
I will start out. So you have before you the most recent revision and version of the proposed non-discrimination ordinance. It was most recently reviewed, I think we may have mentioned this already this evening, by the Code Review Task Force. As a result of questions and discussion at that meeting, some revisions were made. Before those revisions and that meeting, the work group and City Attorney Smith received comments and questions and discussion from a number of sources, and those were discussed and learned from. There was, and revisions were made on the basis of some of those comments as well. We believe that as a result, we have a stronger and better document now than the one that was originally presented to council a few months back. I will also say, I've said this previously, and I believe it bears repeating, the work of drafting legislation is an exacting one. Excuse me. Transforming a clearly and firmly held goal into the language of the law that can be, we hope to, will be interpreted consistently by all is a great challenge. The motion before us also includes scheduling council action on this ordinance as part of our March 5th meeting. The working group proposed this date in order to allow all of us, council members, staff, and members of the community, ample time to read the ordinance carefully and thoughtfully. One of the, I will just go a little off my script here and say one of the things that we struggle with from time to time as members of council is feeling that we are being rushed to make decisions. And we wanted to make sure that we did not have that distraction in this thought process. So what that means for us as council members is that we now have ample time, all of us, to ask any questions in advance of the March 5th meeting, have discussions, and ask for clarifications, and to have ample time to be able to come to that meeting ready to articulate our positions on the ordinance, to debate and discuss its merits, and to cast our votes. We, again, I repeat what I said before, we felt it was very important that this review period for all of us be sufficient. And the February meeting schedule of council that puts our next meeting just 1 week from today, we did not feel was sufficient time. We want to, as I said, avoid any possibility of feeling rushed in this process to a decision. And I would also add, for council members and also for members of the public, if you still have access to the PowerPoint that Mr. Smith prepared for us for the work session at which the first draft that was shared was introduced, that remains a very, very good tool to use to give the context of what's going on in the ordinance and what the aim of what is intended to be accomplished here. It's very easy to get very hung up in the fine points and the very detailed legal language, and I'm not saying don't read the ordinance, but I'm saying if you have the time and access to that PowerPoint, that can be a really good context tool. That's it for now. Thank you.
Mr. Smith, or does any other member of the work group care to comment? Mr. Smith?
Just a reminder that the ordinance was drafted because both state and federal governments have failed to enact legislation to protect those in the lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender community. So this is to augment, not to replace any existing laws, rules, and regulations. Those will still remain in effect and remain applicable to everybody. This ordinance prohibits discrimination in employment, public accommodations, and housing. It requires non-discrimination by those contracting with the city. It adds protections for sexual orientation, gender identity, and gender expression. It's the same protection against discrimination provided for other classifications like race, national origin, age, color, religion, and so forth. It's complaint-based enforcement. So there would be a complaint to the city manager if the complaint alleges a violation of state or federal requirements. The complaint would be referred to the appropriate agency. If not, the city manager would investigate. Possible consequences could result in mediation, civil infraction citation, or if it's a city contractor, they could be disqualified from city contracts and have to remit payments that have already been made to them. So there are significant consequences to this, and again, it doesn't displace any existing law. It simply adds to it and adds protections that our state and federal governments have not chosen to adopt.
Good. Thank you, Mr. Smith. Councilmember Gearbaugh or Councilwoman Mitchell, as members of the work group, anything you'd like to add this evening?
No, thank you.
Mr. Gearbaugh?
Just for me, this was a point to bring it to council so that we do actually finally act on it. Does it meet every single thing that we wanted it to? We were hoping and tried to strive for that. I believe each member of council needs to review this and decide. There are some points of contention, I think, that have been brought up, as mentioned by individuals tonight, and also in communications that we've received that I've forwarded on to our attorney and city manager, sorry. So basically it is finally to have the ability to look at this and really to go over it with a fine-tooth comb from your perspectives so that we can act upon it. From my perspective, I think we've done an excellent job to get something forward. Is it possibly compromising in some areas? I'm not sure. What we need to know, though, is that we all move forward on this, and I'd like to see us as a council moving forward with this unanimously. So that's my desired hope.
Very good. Ms. Tahar, would you like to add something?
Yes, just along the lines of Mr. Gearbaugh's comment. Mr. Smith reminds us from time to time when we've gotten entangled in single points or 1 or 2 points, that it's very important also to bear in mind as reading this how far forward this ordinance moves us and how important that is.
Very good. Well, barring any significant change, just so there's absolutely no ambiguity, this will be an action item at our March 5th meeting. Again, as was stated by, I think, Ms. Tahar, as well as maybe Mr. Smith and Mr. Gearbaugh as well. If you do have questions, this applies both to city council members and members of the public. If you do have questions, Ms. Tahar, are you encouraging that those questions and concerns be directed to you, Councilwoman Mitchell, and Councilman Gearbaugh?
Yes, and perhaps also Mr. Campbell in case we need to bring in Mr. Smith
Very good.
for consultations.
But we would welcome your thoughts, your questions, and your concerns in this interim period before the final vote on March the 5th. I'm sorry. We have additional comments or questions. We'll start with Mr. Seo.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just want to make the comment that I will not be present at the March 5th meeting, and it's certainly not the reason for my absence is a long-planned trip out of the country to visit Egypt at the behest of my wife, not to avoid having to vote on an issue of this magnitude. I certainly feel it's a step in the right direction that we must provide for the comfort and well-being of all people in our community. And I think it's an important step forward. So my absence on the 5th is not a sign of anything other than the fact that my wife is taking me to Egypt.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Seo. Ms. Dillon?
Two things. First, do we have a red line available as to what was changed since the last version of this?
I think that's what was included in your packet, isn't it?
No, it is
was
not
the
a
clean
red
copy. I can comment to that if I.
Please,
if
Ms.
I may.
Tahar.
So that was a item of discussion among some, not all of the members of the working group. And there are red line versions available, but between the version that came out several months ago to council and this one, there have been a number of changes. And I'm not sure that there's a red line version that shows all of them. And so there's that aspect. And the other point was that I at least think that coming to this version fresh and taking it on its own and not getting bogged down into which tiny details have been changed is perhaps a more holistic way to approach it. But that's just, as my friend Carla says, just one girl's opinion.
Well, I appreciate that, and with all due respect, I actually disagree with you. Because if there were things changed, they were changed for a reason, and I'd like to know the justification for that. There's obviously some issues outstanding, and how those are going to be addressed would be my concern. So that's just, my concern is that when we're doing documents, that we are not doing separate versions of documents, that we are constantly changing a document, it appears. In Macworld, you can look at every time you've opened your document. And maybe that's not the case with the city, but it should be available to us to have red lines of contracts and any kind of documentation so that we can see how the document has evolved, in my opinion. The other thing I'd like to talk about is how are we planning to disseminate this to the public? To make sure that they have access to reading it. I would like it beyond just online because not everybody's online. So if we can make sure that we've got copies, print copies available at City Hall, and we make sure that people know that it's something that we would like the public to be involved in.
Let me state this, unless there's objection from the work group. We can get the latest version to the city clerk's office. The city clerk is out this week. The deputy clerk is in charge. I see no objections to having some hard copies made available. If someone comes into the front counter and requests one, please give it to them. If someone contacts you and like one electronically, we can certainly send it out via email. I would also note, while this process has been more protracted than I would have hoped, we have provided the public ample opportunity to raise questions and concerns, and I'm particularly proud of the work group's effort in doing so. So I want to thank Ms. Tahar, Ms. Mitchell, and Mr. Gearbaugh. In fact, we had a coffee hour that was well attended, and we had a robust discussion on this very topic. So certainly we welcome public input, your questions and concerns. And if you'd like a hard copy or an electronic copy, please contact the clerk's office. Please.
So, and with regard to the line, the red line version, Mr. Gearbaugh and Ms. Mitchell was...
I don't know which version to actually provide because the
Right.
Code Enforcement Office reviewed it, revised it twice. Then there's a version that was handed out at the work session, and then I'm not sure when it got changed from here, so if
I guess I would
Scott
want to
Smith
see
has
from the last
something-
version that was presented to us to this version.
Okay, so it'd be
I
from-
don't need to see all the pieces of how you got there. I just want to see from this step to this step.
I don't know if Mr. Smith has that. Generate something? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
I don't have any problem with that.
Additional questions or concerns? If there's no further discussion on the motion, we'll proceed to vote. It's been properly moved by Gearbaugh, seconded by Mitchell, to acknowledge receipt and to schedule action for March the 5th. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Ayes have it, the motion carries unanimously. We move on to the discussion portion of our agenda. Commission, committee, and task force reports from council members. Mayor Pro Tem Tahar.
Yes, the Arts and Culture Committee met late last month, and a couple of things to report on. First of all, council members may recall some time back there was a lot of excitement and discussion about the possibility of the creation of a sculpture, a public sculpture using some of the tracks from the old mod streetcar that were unearthed during the Michigan Avenue project. And the Rotary was very interested in providing some funding for that. After some research and digging into what actually would be involved in creating a project from that material, it's not financially feasible to do it within the kind of budget that the Rotary and the Arts and Culture Committee was capable of pulling together. The funds that would be needed, realistically needed, were 5 to 10 times more than we had even remote chance of pulling together. So that project is off our table. And the mayor came to, but we have a new area of interest. The mayor came recently to the committee and presented the Bixby Marionette Collection as an area that the Arts and Culture Committee might be interested in being active within. And so work is beginning on that. There's quite a bit of interest and excitement. We have a number of new members in the group who are not necessarily longtime Saline residents, so didn't even necessarily know about the Bixby collection. So there's that's now in the beginning stages of discussion, and we're very hopeful that something interesting will come from that. Thank you.
Very good, thank you. Councilwoman McClellan and then Councilwoman Mitchell.
Just adding to the arts and culture as well, that we will have the student art banners coming up for students from kindergarten to 12th grade. That'll be coming up shortly, so keep your eyes open for that. And then youth council, we didn't meet, but a lot of the members worked really hard at Winterfest with the shovels, snow down. I don't know if anybody noticed the shovels on display on the light posts. I think we had 7 entries from various clubs and organizations in town, and the Saline, I'm going to get the name wrong, not the youth council, but the student council at the high school was the winner. So, and I think you can go on Twitter on the Saline Youth Council Twitter handle and check those out. But it was a fun event, and I'm proud of the kids that organized that. So
Terrific. Appreciate your involvement. Ms. Mitchell.
Your Honor, I just want to mention my gratitude for your coffee hour this past week. For those who weren't able to be there, it focused on the rec center, and Director Scruggs actually came and attended, which I thought was a welcome addition, and it was very informative. I appreciated that there were citizens who attended and were interested in discussing certain aspects of the rec center and the services, and I appreciate your time.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Additional committee, commission, or task force reports. How about reports or other announcements? Okay, what about, I think you're up, Bob, wastewater treatment plant update.
There's not a whole lot to update since our last meeting. The contract's going out for bids next month in March. We have been adding oxidizers of various kinds to the influent to help to reduce the sulfide levels. I don't know how effective it's been. It will only affect the primary stages of treatment, not the secondary or the sludge storage. We've had, the number of complaints are down somewhat. They're mostly confined to the neighborhoods directly surrounding the houses. And as far as the NOVA filters go, unfortunately, Tuesday after the last meeting, I think they went down again. They're both back up and running. One had a faulty wheel, which is going to be addressed in March. And the other one had a issue with the wash water pump, which has been rebuilt. We're still looking, it's not quite right in my eyes, so we're still looking into what to do about it. That's all I have.
Are there any questions for Mr. Scull? Ms. Dillon?
Rebuilt by
The
manufacturer?
motor was rebuilt by Current Electric, which is a contract that the city uses for motor work.
Okay.
The contractor, Nova, had Titus Welding, the installers, remove the pump and have it rebuilt and then sent back to us, and they reinstalled it within maybe 2 days.
Okay. So now, what is our longest span with those running?
58 days.
58, and so we need 60?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
They are coming out in mid-March to replace the bearings with hopefully a longer-term solution with the bearings, and as well as they're going to rebuild the wash heads. They have a new machine that will tap the wash arms so that you can thread more directly into it. And also, they're going to look at a wheel that's somehow the plastic is melded to the metal instead of just glued on it. And hopefully that will take care of the problem. But that will be the third generation of wheels we've had on it.
Right, okay. I won't ask my standard question. I guess what I will ask is, if we were to hit the 60-day mark, and then on the 62nd day, they go down again, what happens then?
Well, they're still under warranty. The warranty extends another 2 years. The 60-day mark was the final payment.
Right. But now, how long have we been going that we haven't been able to get to 60 days? How long is, when did the clock start?
Coming up on 2 years.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's still making me very nervous that we're still pursuing this and not exploring other options because of the time frame it'll take to convert over.
Well, Nova has expressed interest in extending their warranty once the new parts are installed and the final payment is made. Right now, we still have 2 years on it, and I would like to give their final fix at least 60 days to work, which would be maybe mid-July, before we make the decision to maybe look a different direction.
Okay.
While we still have warranty to cover to force the manufacturer to maintain the units.
Okay. And do we have a cost counter of what it's costing to add these extra chemicals? Do we know where we're at about with that?
The chemicals are about they're about $6 a gallon. We're feeding about 25 gallons a day. It's going to cost us probably $50,000 by the end of the year.
Okay.
And that is if we continue on the course we are. We may not, depending on the outcome of what we're adding.
Right. And do you feel like there's any kind of measurable difference?
You know, there are so many factors that going into the odor portion of the process. Again, the oxidizer will simply help the influent and the primary treatment. Say the digester, which is very close to the fence, will not be affected by any kind of oxidizer we're adding into the influent. Right. That'll be addressed. Well, we do have a mister to kind of cover the scent up, but again, that's a warm weather device. We can't use it when it gets below 32 because it's a water-based product. The new odor abatement has a vapor generator, I guess you'd call it, that would produce a vapor instead of a mist, which won't freeze. And that's part of the new odor work.
Okay. I guess I'm concerned, are we going to start as we head into spring and we get warmer weather, are we going to start getting more calls again as we hit the warm weather? I mean, we had thought they were going to sort of drop off once it got cold. And that doesn't seem to be the case.
Well, they seem to drop off when it got cold. When it got bitterly cold, I think the air works a little bit differently. It doesn't disperse, and it kind of clings around. So I think that was the issue. When it's bitterly cold or when it's hot is the main odor. But we generate odor all the time. It's just the strength of it varies.
We just need a mild spring day every day?
That would be nice if you could.
Okay, because I'm definitely smelling, early mornings, I've noticed it again in the downtown. I'm not calling it in because I'm driving and I don't want to get stopped by the chief. So, I mean, when I'm saying early morning, 5 to 6:30 in the morning, you sit at the Four Corners waiting and I can smell it there.
Well, that's the reason we're going the course with the odor work.
Thank you.
Additional questions, Mr. Gearbaugh?
Just a statement. I think what you're doing is working somewhat, because not to dismiss what's happening right next to the plant, but I have not detected the odor in the last 2 weeks, and I know we've had some seriously cold days and even still nights. So as far as I'm concerned,
Well-
you're heading kind of in the right direction. But I mean, I know we haven't solved it, but at least to the degree that I haven't smelled it, and I don't know if Ms. McClellan smelled it in her area
Well, that's
either, so.
encouraging. Again, the chemicals are expensive, and it's only a short-term fix. It's not meant for long-term.
Well, as
Just
long as
be-
it works until a year
Yeah,
from now.
well,
I'm
that's
happy.
what we're shooting for.
Yeah.
Ms. Mitchell?
Thank you, Your Honor. And thank you, Mr. Skull. I share Ms. Dillon's concern about this NOVA equipment. And it sounds like you are reaching a critical mass point in July as far as, let's take a look at the last 2 years, and do we need to go in a different direction entirely? What I'm hoping is that the research on that direction can happen before July, so that we have some options ready to go. If that is the case, that we do need to go in a different direction, I'm hoping that our city manager will act in a proactive manner on this subject. It just remains a high area of concern for a lot of our residents.
It's a concern for everybody, and especially myself. And the thought of going in a different direction is not an easy decision to make, because there will be probably certain legal questions as well as financial. And the engineering and design, it takes a long time to build whatever equipment we purchase. If we start in July and we start looking at it, getting the ball rolling, we'll still have a year and a half with the warranty, probably more if they extend the warranty after the permanent fixes in March, end of March, third week.
So what I'm hearing you say is that you feel like we have time within the warranty to adequately research and come up with alternatives, and kind of close our eyes and jump and hold our nose, if we,
Right.
not to make a pun, but, and get ready to jump at that point. We will have plenty of time to research and come up with solutions.
Yeah, again, I think it'll take a year between the engineering work. They have to, again, work within the confines of the existing building, and they'll have to have it built and moved. But I don't think it should take more than, I think we should have ample time with the existing filters. Hopefully, they'll fix them.
And is there an issue, if we do have this kind of construction, what kind of effect would that have on the current progress of the odor abatement?
That's a real good question, and I'm not sure how to answer that. The building is isolated from any odor work, but it would involve a certain amount of electrical work, and how that would interfere, or even if it would, I don't know. I don't have the answer for that.
Mm-hmm.
You want to follow up with Mr. Rubel at
I sure
Tech,
will.
see if you could provide some insight on that, because it is an excellent question. Anything further, Ms. Mitchell?
No, thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Ms. McClellan?
Yeah, that was going to be kind of my question too, is how do we want to get involved in messing with that system while we're trying to fix the other system, and what kind of effect does one have on the other, and do we need to be looking at them all at the same time? I'm concerned that, I want it to work, I want it to work, and I want us to have extended warranties if it doesn't, but I also don't want to mess up fixing what the ultimate issue is the odor, getting those
Again,
odor
I have-
scrubbers in and getting that working and going, and then throwing, an outlier on top of that. Will that affect, do they affect each other? I guess that's my question.
Again, I don't think the odor abatement and the filters are two separate issues, with the exception of maybe the electrical portion of it. I don't know how that's going to affect it. I think as long as we can get the filters working, we'll have time to design or build if we need to go that direction. But that's a big step, and we should give the changes that are planned by the manufacturer a chance to see if they work or not.
And is there potential to look into just making sure, getting more of a warranty in the meantime, you know what I mean? Like making sure that we can go past that 2 years if say we get to the 60 days.
Well,
We still have to get to the 60 days, right? But getting that process done, that way at least we have more time on a warranty situation where we can hopefully get a manufacturing
It is my understanding
fix to
that
it.
Nova has tentatively agreed to extending the warranty once they receive final payment and they get their final repairs in, and we get a little bit of runtime behind them.
Do we, I mean, I don't, maybe this is a question for Mr. Smith, but do we have any kind of, how do we get that process done? Like, I don't want to give them a payment and say, oh, and then they're going to say, yeah, we'll extend the warranty, and then we don't have anything to come back to them with. Is there some kind of negotiation that can happen to get that done before we pay them?
Yes.
That's probably a question for you.
Yes.
Okay.
Anything further, Ms. McClellan?
No, that's it.
Mr.
Thank you.
Gearbaugh?
Just kind of an observation. We're nowhere near a catastrophic failure with the filters at this point in time, correct?
No, but you never know what's around the corner. It seems they have been, again, you all know that they've had incidents with the filters throughout their lifespan of these new filters. The company's been very responsive, but that doesn't make up for a product that doesn't really work, that we can't rely on. As far as the discharge permit, and that could be an issue if they fail in the summer months when the permit limits are stricter.
Yeah, and those are the things, when we look at, I guess those would be the liabilities that I'm worried about, to understand what potential costs are associated with that. Because do we have any idea what the normal maintenance would have been for these parts that are failing?
We have a schedule from Nova, what it costs to have somebody come out, and the service charges. I don't have them with me right now.
I'm just curious for us to understand what would have been a normal, it shouldn't fail like this every 60 days, I
No.
agree. But what is the expectation that it should be, so?
So in addition to asking Mr. Brian Rubel the question that was proposed by Councilwoman Mitchell, I don't see any reason why council shouldn't have access to the documents that Mr. Gearbaugh just referenced from Nova.
No.
It's just for our understanding of what we're actually dealing with and agreeing. I think before we move forward, we need to understand what we have, and is the cost of just repairing it every so often, attributable that we could afford it versus having to rip the whole thing out and spend up, I don't know, $500,000 to try and replace what we've got going now.
I'm afraid it'd probably be more than that,
Yeah,
but,
that's what we need to look at the cost analysis. Thanks.
Is there a last question, Ms. Dillon?
I do. I'm sorry, I forgot to ask earlier. Have you made any progress with getting on site at River Ridge?
I did. I've made several phone calls, and I finally reached somebody, the area supervisor that oversees River Ridge, as well as a couple other plants in the area. And as far as he knows, they have no odor complaints from River Ridge and no operational issues at this time. That doesn't mean there's not any odors coming from River Ridge. It's that we have everybody in tune to call me when there's an odor, and if there's an odor on the west side and the wind's blowing out of the west, it's not us. But everybody's just been conditioned to call. So I can't rule it out completely that there's nothing coming from there.
I will say that the smell from there, or in that area, has been less. It's in frequency as well as stink level.
They've changed contractors to operate the plant, so maybe that's where the change has been.
Thank you for following up on that.
Mr. Scull, thank you. Appreciate your time. Mr. Forrest, do you want to come to the podium now? I'd like to revisit, albeit briefly, the Henry Street traffic study that we discussed with staff, with some consultants, and with some of our residents several weeks ago, and get council members' insights on, one, is there additional information or data that you believe you need to make a strategic informed decision? And or two, do you have any insights on how we proceed? There were a number of options that were enumerated and listed as part of that report, and I'm interested in trying to develop consensus so staff feels like they have direction and can possibly come back at a subsequent council meeting for this body to take formal action if that's required. Mr. Seal, can I put you on the spot and start with you, and then I would end with Councilwoman Mitchell?
I will say that I read the follow-up memo that came from Mr. Fordyce. It answered all the questions I had, and I understand that there are a lot of strictures in place, not only from the state because of the type of road it is and the kinds of funds that we seek for the maintaining that road and that at that status,
Right.
but also the uniform code also dictates things like the beacon, which I assume is the flashing signal we talked about. So I'm satisfied.
Okay. Ms. Dillon?
Just for clarification, the flashing beacon is an overhead?
Yeah, the overhead that in this situation would flash red on Henry and yellow on South Ann Arbor.
Right.
That has the same, the same warrants basically as the four-way stop does. It's a crash history warrant that we don't meet.
Right. Do we have to adhere to that? I mean, do we have any recourse to say we feel as though it's an issue and we would like to install it? I mean, are we allowed to do that?
I think technically you're allowed to, but I think it's a significant liability if there's then a crash at an intersection where we've installed a traffic control device that does not meet the standards. We're basically 100% liable for that.
Okay.
So I would very strongly recommend sticking with the standards.
Okay. If we can't do that, then can we pursue something to clear that intersection, meaning there would no longer be parking within 20, 30 feet of, I know we don't want to get rid of parking, in front of like Salt, and have the bushes removed at, you know, the other business, and
Yep.
clear up those intersections. The other day, I was almost broadsided because somebody just did not see that, you know, that I was coming through. I had the right of way.
That type of analysis was not part of this study.
Right.
I mean, this was strictly the speed profile of the roadway and whether or not that intersection met warrants for four-way stop or traffic signal control. We can do follow-up study there on ways to improve sight lines. There might be some geometry changes we could make, potentially, you know, repositioning the crosswalks, things like that. But that's well beyond the scope of what we've looked at here.
Okay, I just think that intersection is always going to be an issue for this community because people don't know what to do. I was heading towards Milan over the weekend, and they have a beacon light on Ann Arbor Milan Road at, I'm not sure what the cross street is.
Stony Creek.
Halfway between here and downtown Milan.
Stony Creek.
Is it Stony Creek? And there was a tremendous amount of traffic, and it really kept everything moving as who knew what to do. And that's a very clear, you know, it's nothing but farm fields around there. So you can see cars. And I still felt much safer having the beacon, knowing that those people know they're supposed to stop
Right.
coming across.
Yeah, I mean, further study of that in you know, other types of improvements is something we can look at that's, you know, beyond this. I've been intentionally driving through there more frequently recently, and one curious thing I noted is that 2 blocks north of there is the exact same type of intersection. The north-south leg doesn't stop, the east-west leg does at McKay Street. There's a lot less traffic on McKay Street than there is on Henry, but there's no confusion there, you know, and why that intersection, the north-south traffic knows exactly what to do, and then at Henry Street they don't.
There also seems to be a lot of confusion, and maybe better signage or something can help with it, with people not stopping on West Henry at Monroe. I think they're assuming that the people on Monroe have a stop sign, because several times.
I mean, regardless of whether they have a stop sign or not, you have to stop at a stop sign.
Yeah, well, they're not. It's definitely a rolling stop, to the point where it's becoming a very dangerous spot, I would think.
If I may, that's one of the things to help with that would be enforcement. I know the chief is, the department has stepped up our presence there and increased stops over the last few weeks. That certainly is something to add to that, is to be observing and enforcing if people are not adhering to the stop sign at Monroe and Henry Street.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Tahar?
Yes, so I would echo the interest that Ms. Dillon expressed in looking at the sight lines at the Henry and Ann Arbor intersection. I am at that intersection more often on foot than in a car, and I have observed that it's very difficult to see. And I think that one of the differences between McKay and the McKay Ann Arbor intersection, which I'm very familiar with it, as well, from a driving point of view, is that the sightlines are much better at McKay than at Henry. I'm sure there's many other factors involved there, but if it's possible to take a look at sightlines there, I think that might help. And Mr. Campbell, I had jotted down to ask if the chief has any insights about what if increased enforcement has had any effects up until this point. Can we ask that question?
Chief, we'd welcome you to the podium.
Thank you. Yes, I've personally spent quite a few hours down on Henry Street myself in a police vehicle running radar, and I feel that we have had an impact. When I come into the community about 5:45 in the morning, that's one of the first things I do is drive down Henry Street, come off Michigan Avenue, and there's always officers sitting at either end of Henry Street monitoring the traffic flow. I'm generally there around 1, 2 in the afternoon when I'm done with my administrative duties, and then the afternoon shift comes out and they're hitting it anywhere between 4:30 and 6:30. So we are starting to have an impact. We've made 29 traffic stops on Henry Street since the last council meeting, and officers have written 10 tickets. It's been a long time since I've been radar certified, so all mine are verbal warnings. I've had everything from someone going to the barber shop, zipping along. Our top speed so far, I believe, has been 41 through there. So there's some, at least with my traffic stops, there's a lot of educational components to it, talking about the fact that we have residents there that don't want to let their kids out to play in the front yard or walk to school. So that's very disturbing. That's not being a good community member. So a lot of that education and also seeing the police vehicles down there, we're starting to see some of the speeds start to slow down a bit. So
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, let me just say I would be amenable to the suggestion made by Councilwoman Dillon and Mayor Pro Tem Tahar about evaluating those sight lines a bit more. I don't have your memo or the consultant's report in front of me, Mr. Fortes, but if I recall, the low-hanging fruit, if you will, was additional signage, striping, a speed indicating device, and of course, I had brought this up at the work meeting, enhanced enforcement. So I would be in favor of pursuing all of those, including the sight lines evaluation, and then engaging with our residents and concerned citizens along Henry Street and Monroe Street after a 6-month period to see if they've noticed a positive impact. Subsequent to that, if they have not, then of course we could consider and debate and explore other options. But I'm in favor of, again, many of the things that you had initially recommended, which are good fixes, but also are relatively inexpensive. So that's my perspective. Mr. Gearbaugh?
Looking at some of your comments in here about the parking on both sides of the street, where it said between Monroe and Harris, all the south side parking had been removed, right?
Removed in 1974.
Okay. So do we have parking on Henry Street on the north side all the way down from?
Yeah, from Harris all the way to Monroe. There are some stretches in there between driveways and that are marked as no parking.
So
but-
anywhere on the north side, right from Harris up to Henry, you can park on, except it's just not lined.
It's been lined from Harris To Lewis. And then
But
from
the other way
Lewis,
down, if you head east on East Henry,
East Henry from Harris to Old Creek, there's parking on both sides. And that has not been striped. And that's one of the proposals here is to put a center line and denote those parking lanes there.
but also the in between Harris and South Ann Arbor Street, that portion of Henry's to be lined also?
A center line, and then,
Parking.
so the parking has been bracketed. We're going to look at different striping options and see if we want to mark that as a whole parking
Because at
lane.
one time, that used to be it was no parking because of semis and stuff like that. I didn't know if that was still enforced because of,
It's a little bit blocky. From Harris, there's basically, there's a little bit of no parking for sightline reasons. And then that's about 120 feet of parking. And then you get to that, there's a parking lot. So then for that driveway and the next driveway, there's another stretch that's no parking. And then there's another bracket.
got it. And then the other thing on here, of course, being since it's been 44 years now, in your one line, you mentioned something about where, so as I understand it, in this proposed change is not a change we would like to see if the street is to remain a city major street. Is
Right.
that MDOT statement or
That's
just our
MDOT statement.
assessment?
That's
Okay.
MDOT, yeah.
So if we tried to do that and put parking on both sides, then they come back at us for the money that we put into the street?
At some point, they would basically revoke the major street status and we would lose that revenue.
Okay, thank you.
Anything further, Mr. Gearbaugh?
Nope.
Thank you, Ms. McClellan.
Yeah, I'm going to echo some of what's already been said, but I would like to see that intersection studied further for crosswalk, just maybe something a little bit more than just the striping. I mean, I've been kind of noticing similar intersections in other places, in town and then out in other towns too, and just kind of what you can do with signage and lights, or not necessarily a beacon light, but maybe crosswalks,
Right.
kind of what's on Woodland or in Ann Arbor and places, that kind of thing. I think that would be helpful. But I think the sightlines may clear that up too. So, and then I appreciate Chief Hart, your work, and all the officers out. I've been noticing them quite frequently, and especially in the early morning hours, the lights go off and I can see them from my bedroom window. So it's kind of nice. And then I would personally like to see another volume study done somewhere not around spring break time. I know you've mentioned it in your report here, but I do think the counts probably make a difference when it's not spring break week. And then I did have my question written about how many speed stops we had, but you answered that for me, so thank you.
If I could just comment on the counts. I mean, there's no doubt that the volume was lower during spring break versus the October counts that we took. But the mediations that we're proposing here are not based on volumes. They're based on the speeds. So we did a study. It noted a speed problem. So we're going to do mediations.
Okay.
So we could do another one. We could have the 3,700 cars instead of the 2,300.
But you think the
My
speeds will
suspicion
be the
is the
same?
speed will be the same
Okay.
because that level of volume difference isn't going to, typically will not change the speed profile.
Okay.
And as you get to higher and higher volumes, the effect that has on your speed profile is to reduce it.
Okay.
So this is nowhere near that high that it would do that, but I think it'll be interesting after we get the striping and signage and the feedback signs in place to do another speed study then and see if we've had an impact.
That would be interesting. I just want to make sure that it's around the time when we have maximum volume,
Yeah.
maximum volume.
Yep.
So.
Good. Thank you, Ms. McClellan. Councilwoman Mitchell?
I really appreciate the discussion that we're having here tonight, and I appreciate Mr. Fordyce, your input, and Chief Hart, thank you. I agree with what people have been saying, and there was a lot of talk during the meeting and also on social media afterwards, talking about the methodology. And it's easy to get lost in the micro, but if we back up, the neighbors think there's a speed problem. It sounds like from the discussion on the dais, council members think that there are some speed changes that need to be made.
Yep.
I personally feel like speed needs to be addressed. So I think the important thing is that the neighbors, and we are all on the same page. We want this to be a safe neighborhood.
And the speed study showed that as well.
Correct. And so, and people were concerned about the whole spring break thing, and we just maybe needed to be more clear that, you know, that's not when the volume study was done. That was not during spring break. I did hear a neighbor talk, and I don't know if it was raised around the table, and I want to discuss it, especially as concerns the sight lines. When you're looking at sight lines, there was a discussion about loading, about commercial trucks loading and how they park on Henry. And I don't think that was discussed at the table, but that impacts, I think, people's perceived speed and ability to get through, and it could be that something needs to be more clear. So I would like to request that is taken into consideration or clearly marked, or could we have a map of what is allowed? I think the concern was sometimes loading trucks are impeding one of the entrances into the parking lot. And so that's something I just wanted to make sure. And I have no further comments.
Very good. Well, I jotted down some notes. So, Mr. Fordyce, tell me if I'm wrong, and members of the council, those of you up to date, you can tell me if I'm incorrect. Sounds like a majority would like further evaluation on the intersection and sight lines at Henry and Ann Arbor Street. And it sounds like there is broad consensus to pursue better signage, striping. I didn't hear any objections to the speed indicating devices, and I think we believe that increased enforcement, as long as that continues, has a positive impact on the safety and cohesion of that neighborhood. My notes similar to yours, Mr. Fordyce?
Yeah, and then also evaluating loading on
Yes.
East Henry. Yep.
Per Councilwoman Mitchell's concern, or question, rather. Anybody have anything they'd like to add? Mr. Fordyce, I expect we'll be hearing more from you on this. Thank you for your work. Appreciate it. If there's nothing further on the Henry Street traffic study, we move on to our final discussion item, which is the Fair Deed Development. I will take a lead on this. I've been made aware of some emails that council members have sent regarding the state of that property, specifically the dilapidated abandoned home. I subsequently had a conversation with the city manager and with Attorney Smith and contacted Mr. Farrell. Mr. Farrell and I have always had a good rapport, and I'm mindful of the fact, cognizant of the fact that he has executed and completed some very successful developments, not only in our area, but across the country. So we played a little bit of phone tag and tag via email and finally connected on Sunday afternoon. And I again expressed to him a desire to expedite the demolition of that abandoned home. I asked him point blank, I said, is it realistic to believe that that home could be demolished in a month's time, or that a firm, unambiguous date could be set in the very near future? And he agreed that it could be, and I indicated that I would be repeating that at the meeting this evening. So what I would like to do, unless there's objections, I'd like to add this as a discussion item for our first meeting in March. I'm hopeful at that time the home will be demolished and removed. If not, we can have a discussion and a debate on how best to proceed. But I also asked for a status update on the project. He continues to do his due diligence, continues to be excited about it, and I reiterated that the city supports efforts to develop that property and would like to see his vision realized. But in order to get to that point, we've got to get the blighted structure removed. So that's the update I can provide you. I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have. Ms. Dillon.
I appreciate you reaching out to him, and I appreciate that he is being proactive, hopefully. But I do mention that my email was dated January 26th. That's going to be this will be 6 weeks beyond that email that we are still waiting on him. I mean, it's just perpetual. I mean, would we do this for everybody? Do we want this to be our community? I mean, that the site is just unsightly. And I don't understand why we, as a city, are not being more aggressive in pursuing this. This has gone on for months.
Well, I can tell you the tone and tenor of the phone call that I had with him was, of course, respectful. Again, I've got a good rapport with him. I like him as an individual. But I did stress in the strongest terms the need to expedite the removal of the blighted structure. I'm also cognizant of the fact that we have to maintain a working relationship with him as the owner of the property. And also as somebody, again, who I don't think there's any debate about this, he has executed and completed very successful projects, not only in our area, but across the nation, and we want to see this project come to fruition. Doesn't mean we're always going to agree, doesn't mean we have to like one another, but we've got to find a way to be cooperative and work to have his vision realized. So I don't necessarily disagree with anything that you said. Again, I think a month is reasonable to get it demolished. I'm hoping that takes place. If not, we can consider future options at our first meeting in March. Anything further, Mr. Gearbaugh?
I don't disagree with Ms. Dillon at this point, but my concern too has been there's been some statements made about the reasons why the house hasn't been torn down, and having experienced myself with some of the utilities and things, it was amazing how fast I was able to get something resolved, especially with Comcast, from the context that Mr. Campbell had provided for me. So there is the issue about the property ownership and making sure we're respectful of that, but there's also a time and place where, and we've had this happen before, developers give us a story and the story continues to extend out. And at this point, we're a year into the purchase agreement, because I was looking at the documents before. My concern is that the property, normally when you have a developer, you don't rip it all open and leave it exactly as it is, because we all know we've experienced the hole on Michigan Avenue, and this is fast approaching that concern. So I agree, March 5th is the deadline, but I would need to know from Mr. Smith what we have to proceed with because of the way the contract language was written. I'm not so sure how fast we can get that house to be torn down.
Mr. Smith, do you care to comment at all?
He still needs to comply with the blight ordinances.
Okay. So as long as that can be approached quickly and fast, that would be, but I know how long it took in Ipsy to do some blight ordinances. So.
And that's part of the, we could start enforcement actions, but a court's still going to give him a period of time to do that, and that's after you process it all the way through court. So if we can get it done in the next 30 days, that'll be great.
Okay, thank you.
And again, this will be added as a discussion item for March the 5th, regardless of whether the structure is demolished or not.
Will
Talk
he be
about next
present?
steps. Say again?
Will he be present?
That I do not know. I did not extend an invitation to him. I can extend an invitation to him, but that was not discussed.
I would like him to be here, I think, at this point.
Anything further? Then we come to the second public comment. My friends, under the Open Meetings Act, any citizen may come forward at this time, make comment or question to City Council. This public comment period will be limited to 3 minutes per person. Anyone who would like to speak is requested but not required to state his or her name and address for the record.
Mary Hess. And I was disappointed that there was not an agenda out on the whirligig, because I came to look at yesterday and it still had the January 22nd. So I think when you talked about getting the new computers, that we would still have an agenda out there and at the library. My concern tonight is regarding the soil erosion and sediment ordinance that I would think the county of Washtenaw has. And this is regarding Maple Oaks and Maple Cove. This is a development that I believe has been made hazard or dangerous by the development on the old service center property on Maple Road. What is being done to control the south side erosion? The dirt wall appears to be over a 30-foot cut straight down. Is there any bond guarantee? We have the ordinance. Well, there is an ordinance, and it says the prevention of any damage to adjacent property, any public or private property, without supporting and protecting such property from settling, cracking, or any other damage which may result. I have asked at the Planning Commission last week, I've talked to the mayor, and I am asking and would like to see the Washtenaw County soil erosion as they give permits. The city does not issue permits on soil erosion. The county does. But it is very, very dangerous. And what's exciting as far as new developments is one thing, but protecting those that are presently here, such as that duplex home, that it appears the soil is eroding underneath the plastic, I don't know, fence, whatever. And I would hope that that could be addressed tonight. Thank you.
Are there additional citizen comments? Then we note upcoming meetings. On the 12th, we have our retreat on the 24th, and then our next regular meeting on the 5th. If there's nothing further to be brought up, the chair would entertain a motion to adjourn at 9:30 p.m.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Moved by Tahar, seconded by Dillon. All those in favor of adjourning signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed say nay. Ayes have it. This meeting is adjourned.